welcome to this explainer. We're on the web every single day, right? But how often do we actually stop to think about the invisible architecture holding this whole thing together? Today, we are diving deep into the massive structural challenges that literally almost broke the early web. We're going to trace this wild journey of web scalability, starting with a true crisis that forced the whole industry to completely rethink how data flows. So, to really grasp where our modern blazing fast web performance comes from, we gotta ask a pretty interesting question. How exactly did HTTP/1.1 act as a heroic patch for a system that was buckling under its own weight? Back in the late 90s, the internet was facing a severe infrastructure nightmare. And the solutions those engineers hacked together, well, they laid the foundation for literally everything we do online right now. Picture this, it's the early 90s, and the web is staring down a massive roadblock, IPv4 address exhaustion. At the time, the underlying architecture forced this strict and honestly kind of bizarre one-to-one relationship. A single IP address could only host exactly one website. That's it. As the dot-com boom absolutely exploded, it became painfully obvious we were going to run out of IP addresses entirely, and that would have brought the expansion of the web to a screeching halt. And to make matters even worse, the protocol running the show back then, HTTP/1.0, was just horribly inefficient. Servers were buckling under the load. Why? Well, under 1.0, every single request, whether it's a giant HTML file or just a tiny little icon, demanded a brand new TCP connection. And once that one file was sent, boom, the connection was immediately closed. This caused insane latency and absolutely destroyed bandwidth on slower links. So HTTP/1.1 swooped in and fixed this by making persistent connections the default, keeping that socket open for multiple sequential requests. Because, opening a new TCP connection, it is definitely not free. Setting one up requires a three-way handshake, a SYN, SYNAC, and ACK exchange. That eats up an entire round-trip time before a single byte of data even moves. And it gets worse. TCP uses this slow start phase. It probes the network capacity by starting with a tiny initial congestion window. We're talking maybe 4 kilobytes. By reusing connections, HTTP/1.1 lets subsequent requests bypass that expensive handshake and ride on a nice, warmed-up connection that was already cruising at optimal speeds. All right, let's jump into Section 1, the virtual hosting fix. Okay, so with the connection overhead temporarily band-aided, how did they actually solve that looming IP crisis? Well, they introduced a super simple but incredibly strict rule, the mandatory host header. HTTP/1.1 required that every single request include a host header, spelling out exactly which domain you were trying to reach. If a browser forgot it, the server was strictly instructed to just drop a 400 bad request error right then and there. Now here is the absolute game changer. This one little architectural shift enabled name-based virtual hosting. Because the server now knew exactly which domain name the client wanted, thanks to that header, it could suddenly host dozens or hundreds or even thousands of distinct domains on one single IP address and port. It was an elegant workaround that essentially saved the internet from completely running out of IPv4 addresses back in the 90s. Moving on to Section 2, Advanced Caching and CDNs. So, IP crisis averted, connections are being reused, and the web is growing like wildfire. But to scale globally, engineers really had to eliminate redundant server processing. I mean, why waste bandwidth resending files users already have, right? HTTP/1.1 completely overhauled caching to tackle this. They ditched the clumsy, old, date-based caching from 1.0 and brought in some heavy hitters. We got cache control directives, giving developers super granular control over things like max age. Plus, it introduced ETags, or entity tags. These are basically unique string validators for a specific version of a file. A strong ETag guarantees it's byte-for-byte identical, while a weak one just means, hey, semantically, it's the same data. And by leveraging those ETags, browsers could start making conditional requests. Basically, a client can ask, hey server, I've got this image with ETag XYZ. Has it changed? If it hasn't, the server doesn't waste time resending the whole file. It just fires back a tiny, super lightweight 304 not modified status code. That simple little conversation right there saves massive amounts of data transfer. But this advanced caching logic did way more than just help browsers out. It's literally what made modern content delivery networks, or CDNs, possible. Think of CDNs as giant global HTTP proxy servers. Because we now had headers like cache control, these third-party networks could confidently cache and distribute static files, your images, your CSS, your JavaScript, all over the world. In the real world, this means dropping these CDN edge cache servers right in the user's backyard. It's brilliant for load times. Like, if you're in Europe, you're downloading those heavy assets from a local European edge server, not pinging a main data center all the way in North America. This totally shields the origin server from getting hammered by traffic, letting it focus its computing power entirely on dynamic application logic.
All right, Section 3, the text-based bottleneck.
Now, HTTP/1.1 was undeniably a fantastic bridge. But as web apps got heavier and way more complex, that underlying sequential text-based structure started hitting a massive latency wall. Here is the fatal flaw. It operates strictly in sequence on each connection. Imagine you fire off request A, a huge database query. Then you immediately ask for a tiny CSS file, request B. Well, because they share that same persistent connection, request B is entirely blocked, just sitting there waiting for request A to finish. This incredibly frustrating traffic jam is known as application layer head-of-line blocking.
They did try to patch this in 1.1 with something called pipelining, but honestly, it failed miserably in the wild due to buggy proxies. So developers had to get creative with some pretty drastic, hacky workarounds just to keep sites feeling fast. We're talking domain sharding, literally splitting assets across multiple subdomains just to trick the browser into opening more concurrent connections, or CSS sprites, where you mash dozens of icons into one gigantic image file. We bundled massive scripts together, even injected images directly into the code as base64 text. It was essentially a ton of digital duct tape.
Which brings us to Section 4, the HTTP/2 resolution.
Look, those hacks were clever, for sure, but they were only treating the symptoms. Eventually, they actually became counterproductive. We needed a fundamental redesign of how data flows. And that's exactly what HTTP/2 delivered. It finally cleared that application traffic jam by completely tossing out sequential plain text streams. Instead, HTTP/2 introduced a binary framing layer. This allows it to multiplex concurrent streams over just one single TCP connection. So now, request A and request B are chopped up into binary frames, fired off at the exact same time over one connection, and seamlessly reassembled by the browser. Boom, no more waiting in line. And this caused a massive paradigm shift for developers. Under HTTP/2, all those clever 1.1 hacks we just talked about, they actually hurt performance. Domain sharding actively prevents the browser from maximizing that one highly optimized multiplex connection, and bundling all your files together completely destroys that granular caching we set up earlier. HTTP/2 proved, without a doubt, that true multiplexing wasn't just a nice-to-have, it was a mandatory evolutionary step for the web. So, the whole problem is solved, right? We can all go home? Well, actually, no. We really need to ask, does this multiplexing solve TCP transport layer blocking? Sure, HTTP2 totally nails the application-level blocking, but don't forget, it still runs on top of TCP. And down at the TCP level, if even one single data packet gets lost, the entire underlying byte stream just stops. Everything halts waiting for that one retransmission, even if 50 other multiplexed HTTP2 streams are perfectly fine and ready to go in the kernel buffer. Which leaves us with this incredibly exciting thought to wrap up this explainer. As we look past the duct tape of HTTP/1.1 and the binary multiplexing of HTTP/2, the web is already evolving yet again. HTTP/3 is tossing TCP out the window entirely in favor of a protocol called QUIC, which runs over UDP. Under HTTP/3, a dropped packet only pauses the specific stream it belongs to. Everything else keeps flowing smoothly. So, will HTTP/3 and QUIC finally deliver the truly block-free internet we've been chasing? The architecture is rolling out right now, and it is absolutely fascinating to watch. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.